I could feel every eye on me before my mom even opened her mouth. The room smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood, the soft hum of conversation weaving around the clink of glasses. I smoothed my silk blouse, trying to ignore the heat creeping up my neck, the sudden tightening in my chest. I had always imagined this evening would be ordinary, a small celebration, a family gathering. But ordinary wasn't on the menu tonight. Then it happened. "My daughter," Mom announced, voice sharp, drawing everyone's attention, "has never lifted a finger for us." The words echoed, bouncing off the chandeliers, and I felt my stomach drop. My hands, resting on the table, clenched slightly under the weight of disbelief. 50 pairs of eyes shifted toward me, some curious, some judging, some silently amused. The lump in my throat made it hard to swallow. I wanted to laugh, bitterly, quietly, because she had no idea how much she had underestimated me. All those years of effort, of sacrifices she never acknowledged, now reduced to a cruel proclamation in front of everyone. I looked out the window behind her, city lights sparkling like someone else's life. The sound of my phone buzzing in my purse felt comforting, almost grounding. This wasn't the first time she had tried to humiliate me, but it would be the last. Because tonight I realized something. I didn't need anyone's validation. I had already built the life she refused to see. I was 17 when I first felt truly invisible in my own home. It wasn't just the small dismissals, or the rolling eyes when I suggested ideas. It was the way my efforts were swallowed by silence, ignored as if they didn't exist. I had spent months saving from odd jobs, babysitting, tutoring, working weekend shifts at the cafe downtown just to buy groceries or help with bills without making a sound. Every morning, I woke before sunrise, brewing coffee for my mom and sister, preparing lunches, cleaning the house until my fingers ached and my palms were raw. And yet, no one noticed. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I had stayed up all night to finish a project for school, exhausted but hopeful, when my mom stormed into my room. "You never do anything for this family," she snapped, tossing a pile of folded laundry at me. Her words landed like stones, heavy and sharp. I bit back the tears, felt the lump rising in my throat, and forced a steadying breath. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the ache of constant invisibility. I remember retreating to my grandmother's old attic afterward, the faint smell of cedar and dust wrapping around me like a comforting hug. There, I held her locket in my hand, silver, worn, with her initials etched delicately on the back. "You have to believe in yourself first," she had whispered years ago, long before I ever imagined leaving home. Her words felt like a lifeline now, a fragile but unbreakable thread connecting me to courage I didn't know I had. That night, I packed a small bag, notebooks, clothes, a photo of the city skyline I dreamed of living in, and whispered a quiet promise to myself. I will not be invisible anymore. I will build something they cannot ignore. For the first time, I felt the thrill of control, the electric pulse of independence. Leaving wasn't just an escape. It was the first step toward a life where my worth was defined by me, not by their indifference. The first few months after leaving home were the hardest. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, its peeling paint and squeaky floorboards a far cry from the warmth I'd once sought. I worked 3 jobs at once, mornings at a boutique coffee shop, afternoons tutoring, evenings as an assistant at a small marketing firm. My body ached, my mind spun with exhaustion, but there was something intoxicating about finally being the architect of my own life. No one was dismissing me, no one telling me I wasn't enough. I was accountable only to myself. It was there, at that small marketing firm, that I met Miss Parker, a seasoned professional with sharp eyes and an even sharper sense of fairness. She noticed my work ethic immediately, often pulling me aside to offer advice, encouragement, even small opportunities to pitch ideas. "You have talent," she said one late night as we sorted through a pile of client proposals, "but you'll never see how far you can go if you don't start believing it yourself." Those words echoed my grandmother's voice, and I clung to them. Some nights, I cried quietly into the worn couch in my apartment, feeling the sting of loneliness. There were days when a single small failure, A rejected proposal, a client complaint, threatened to make me quit. But every time I considered giving up, I would run my fingers over the locket in my pocket and remember the promise I had whispered to myself in that dusty attic. I wasn't invisible anymore. I would prove my worth, quietly but unmistakably. Slowly, things began to change. I landed my first big client, a local startup seeking someone to revamp their branding. The hours were grueling, but when the launch succeeded, I felt an unfamiliar thrill: pride. My first profitable paycheck, the freedom to pay my bills without counting pennies, the small joys of being able to eat a real dinner without stress. Each victory was a secret celebration, my hidden triumph. As months turned into years, I quietly expanded my network, learned new skills, and took calculated risks. No one at home knew the late nights I spent studying digital marketing, the countless pitches I delivered, the entrepreneurial ventures I nurtured behind closed doors. My social media showed only glimpses, casual photos, minimal posts, careful not to reveal the empire I was quietly building. By the time I reached my late 20s, I owned my first company, had multiple clients, and a modest but impressive net worth. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, forged from persistence, pain, and the refusal to let my past define me. I had transformed invisibility into power, and for the first time, I felt truly unstoppable. The night of the family gathering, I arrived in a sleek black dress that whispered of understated power. The venue glittered with soft chandeliers, expensive art lining the walls, a stark contrast to the modest hall I'd once imagined for my mother's announcement. I could feel the collective curiosity of 50 people circling around me as I stepped inside, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every detail, every element of this evening was a reflection of the life I had painstakingly built in secret. Mom's eyes locked on mine the instant she saw me, sharp with the same dismissive judgment that had haunted my adolescence. I felt a flicker of the old sting, but it passed quickly, replaced with the calm certainty of someone who knows her worth. The room hushed as she began her speech, unaware that the very woman she was belittling now stood across from her in full command of her own destiny. "I need to clarify something," I said, letting my voice roll across the room with a smooth authority that drew every gaze. "Contrary to what you just heard, I have, in fact, lifted far more than a finger for this family, just not in ways you noticed. I've built the life, a business, and a future that no one could have imagined." I gestured to the office-inspired gallery surrounding us, art I had commissioned, furniture sourced from international designers, awards and framed achievements lining a side wall. "This is my world," I continued, crafted quietly, patiently, without anyone's approval or recognition. "And yes, I did it all while you assumed I was doing nothing." I watched her mouth fall open, the blush of disbelief creeping across her cheeks. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire, some gasps of admiration, some murmurs of shock. Friends and distant relatives who had long doubted me now stared, eyes wide, as the realization of my hidden success sank in. Then I laid it out plainly. My company was profitable, my clients international, my net worth well beyond what they had ever assumed. I owned the venue we were standing in, every piece of art, every detail, a tangible testament to the years I had fought alone. The weight of their disbelief was almost sweet, a silent acknowledgement of the power I had quietly cultivated. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched her champagne glass, a flicker of shame passing through her eyes. For once, I felt no need to soften my words. "I didn't need anyone to notice me when I was building this," I said softly, but firmly. "But now, you can't ignore me anymore." The room stayed silent for a heartbeat too long, then erupted in quiet applause and murmurs of admiration. Their shock, their guilt, their awe, it all mingled in the air, a heady mix of validation I didn't need but had earned. I had turned invisibility into spectacle, humiliation into empowerment, and tonight, everyone finally saw what I already knew. I was unstoppable. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand. Mom, once sharp and domineering, now seemed fragile under the weight of her own words. My siblings shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to speak, to apologize, or simply to shrink back into the shadows they had once occupied comfortably. I could see it all clearly: the fear, the guilt, the surprise. And I realized that this was no longer about proving myself. It was about setting boundaries and creating space for real change. "I'm willing to help," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "But things will be different from now on." I paused, letting the gravity of that statement sink in. No more belittling. No more assumptions that I owe you my time, my energy, or my validation. If you want to be part of my life, it will be on the basis of respect, honesty, and effort, not guilt or nostalgia. I laid out specific terms. My mother would need to acknowledge her past dismissals, stop projecting her frustrations onto me, and pursue her own passions instead of expecting me to fill her voids. My siblings would need to contribute meaningfully, in ways that built connection rather than draining it. Each condition, I explained gently but firmly, was tied to growth, theirs as individuals and ours as a family. "You can't just show up and expect things to be as they once were," I said, my tone firm but not cruel. "We all have to evolve. We all have to take responsibility for the life we lead." The silence in the room was heavy but electric. They could feel the shift, the subtle but undeniable transfer of power. I watched my mother's eyes well up. Pride and shame warred within her, a cocktail of emotions she had never experienced facing me as an equal. "I want to try," she whispered. "I want to be better." And that was enough for now. Enough to know that my voice mattered, that my boundaries would be honored, that the years of quiet struggle had transformed into tangible authority. For the first time, I realized that power wasn't about dominance or revenge. It was about setting conditions that allowed respect, growth, and true connection to flourish. I let my gaze sweep across the room, taking in the faces of those who had doubted me, laughed at me, or dismissed me. Now they were listening. Now they were learning. And I, finally, was free to define my own life, on my own terms, with grace, strength, and unwavering clarity. In the days and weeks after that night, I noticed subtle changes. My mother began spending time on her own projects, enrolling in a painting class she had always wanted to try, smiling without the weight of judgment lingering on her face. My siblings approached me differently, asking questions, offering help, and listening rather than assuming. I realized that change doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day, you wake and see how far you've come. I often returned to the locket my grandmother had given me, now resting on my desk beside a framed photo of the skyline I once dreamed about. Holding it, I felt the bridge between past and present, between hurt and triumph. That small silver token had been my tether when everything felt impossible, my reminder that I was capable, resilient, and deserving. It still reminded me to act with grace, even when wielding power, and to value myself above the judgments of those who once doubted me. Sitting in my office, I let the quiet settle around me, the gentle hum of the city below, the sunlight spilling across the polished floor. I reflected on the journey, the sting of humiliation, the years of silent effort, the moments of doubt, and the tiny victories that had accumulated into a life no one could ignore. I realized that the most important triumph wasn't the wealth, the business, or the recognition. It was the woman I had become, strong, unyielding, compassionate, and unapologetically myself. And then I smiled, softly, to myself. Not for their approval, not for validation, but because I had finally arrived at the place I was always meant to be. I was no longer defined by what I had endured. I was defined by what I had built, by how I had loved myself through the pain, and by the boundaries I had drawn to protect my peace. I whispered, almost as a quiet mantra, the words that had carried me through every struggle. I didn't need them to see my worth, but tonight, they finally did. And with that, I knew I was free.